Everyone at the exclusive Liel restaurant believed Sophie was making the biggest mistake of her life that night. When the city's most eligible billionaire walked through the doors with a frail, silent woman in a wheelchair, the staff barely glanced at her, dismissing her as senile, or worse, an inconvenient burden, and instead fixed their attention on the one thing that mattered to them: money. But Sophie, the shyest waitress on the floor, did something so unexpected it made the manager scream for security. She didn't speak, not a single word. She simply raised her hands, and what followed did more than quiet the room. It brought a billion-dollar empire to its knees and unearthed a secret that had been buried for 30 years. You won't believe who that woman actually was. Before any of that unfolded, Sophie Miller stood in the employee locker room adjusting her apron, her fingers trembling slightly as she tightened the knot behind her back. The fabric was stiff, carrying the faint scent of starch and lemon polish, a smell so constant it had embedded itself into her senses. Lucia wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater of wealth, a polished stage where the city's elite performed their success, and people like Sophie were nothing more than silent stagehands, present, necessary, and invisible. She lifted her eyes to the tarnished mirror, studying the dark circles beneath them, shadows earned from juggling 3 jobs just to keep up with her father's dialysis treatments. She looked exhausted, bone-deep, tired, but exhaustion wasn't allowed here. In this place, looking tired meant lacking discipline. "Move it, Miller." The sharp command sliced through the room, making her flinch. She turned to see Gavin, the floor manager, standing there with that familiar expression of superiority. Gavin wore authority like a cheap suit, fitting and uncomfortable for everyone forced to endure it. His slicked back hair gleamed beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, and his lips were permanently curled in a sneer he reserved for employees he considered low value. "Table 4 needs water. Table 7 wants the wine list. And for God's sake, smile. You look like you're attending a funeral," he snapped, glancing down at his gold watch, a knockoff he swore was genuine. Clear his throat. "Yes, sir." "Sorry, Gavin," Sophie whispered, lowering her gaze as she brushed past him. "That's Mr. O'Connell to you," he hissed. The dining room felt like another world entirely. Warm golden light bathed the space, crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling like frozen tears. The carpet was so thick it swallowed footsteps whole. This was the playground of the Harringtons, the Vanderbilts, and the new tech moguls who wore hoodies worth more than Sophie's entire life earnings. Tonight, there was an electric tension in the air. The staff buzzed with nervous anticipation. Rumor had it that Lucas Harrington himself was coming. Lucas Harrington, the name alone shifted the air. At just 32, he was the CEO of Harrington Heavy Industries, his net worth hovering somewhere in the 11-figure range. He was infamous for his ruthless business acumen and his icy demeanor. He avoided interviews, skipped charity galas unless he controlled the board, and had zero tolerance for bad service. "Did you hear?" Jessica whispered beside her, polishing a wine glass with almost violent precision. Jessica was everything Sophie wasn't: confident, loud, unapologetically ambitious. She didn't see Lucille as employment. She saw it as a hunting ground for a rich husband. "Lucas is bringing a guest. Some say it's a new supermodel girlfriend. I bet she orders a salad and picks at it for 2 hours. I just hope they tip well," Sophie murmured, lifting a pitcher of ice water. Jessica smirked, checking her lipstick in the reflection of a spoon. "You won't get near their table, honey. Gavin already assigned the VIP section to me and Thomas. He said, 'You're too twitchy. You make the guests nervous.'" The words stung, though Sophie stayed quiet. It was true, her anxiety betrayed her. Her hands sometimes shook when she poured wine, and she struggled to make easy conversation with men whose suits cost more than her father's medical bills. She had learned to survive in the background, clearing plates, refilling bread baskets, staying unnoticed. Then the restaurant doors opened, not loudly, but with a heavy, expensive whoosh that seemed to shift the entire atmosphere. Conversations didn't stop, but they changed pitch. Heads turned subtly. Lucas Harrington entered. He was taller than he appeared in magazines, dressed in a charcoal suit tailored with architectural precision. His face was sharp and unsmiling, his eyes scanning the room like a predator evaluating new territory. But he wasn't accompanied by a supermodel. He was pushing a wheelchair. In it sat a woman who looked almost fragile against the grandeur surrounding her. She appeared to be in her late 60s, wearing a simple grey blouse, elegant, but outdated beside the glittering couture of other diners. Her white hair was pulled back into a severe bun. No jewelry adorned her. Her hands lay motionless in her lap, and her gaze hovered somewhere distant, detached from the spectacle around her. Gavin nearly sprinted to greet them, his face rearranging itself into an obsequious grin. "Mr. Harrington, what an honor," he gushed. bowing slightly. "We have the private alcove prepared for you right by the window. The best view in the city." Lucas gave a curt nod. "Make sure it's quiet. My mother is tired, of course." "Of course. Right this way." Gavin snapped his fingers at Jessica and Thomas, who straightened instantly, soldiers reporting for duty. From the service station, Sophie watched, clutching a tray of dirty napkins, her eyes lingering not on Lucas but on the silent woman in the wheelchair. She felt a strange pull toward the woman in the wheelchair, an almost magnetic tug she couldn't explain. While Lucas commanded the room with the effortless authority of a man accustomed to being watched and obeyed, the clear-throat woman seemed to be shrinking into herself, folding inward as if trying to disappear, and there was a profound loneliness in her posture that Sophie recognized instantly. The unmistakable look of someone who is in the room, but not of the room, present in body yet somehow exiled from the life unfolding around her. As the group moved towards the VIP alcove, the wheel of the chair caught on the edge of a thick Persian rug, and the chair jerked violently, the sudden motion sharp and jarring, the woman letting out a small, startled sound, a sharp intake of breath that sounded almost like a bird's cry, her hands flying up defensively as though she expected something worse to follow. Lucas stopped immediately, his face darkening with concern, but before he could act, Gavin stepped in with quick, performative efficiency. "Apologies. These rugs, antique." Gavin laughed nervously, giving the chair a forceful shove to dislodge it, and the woman flinched at the sudden movement, her eyes widening in panic as she looked up at Gavin, her mouth opening and closing slightly, struggling to form anything but no words came out. "She's fine. She's fine," Gavin assured Lucas, patting the back of the wheelchair with a familiarity that made Sophie cringe. "Right this way, Mum. Don't worry. We'll get you a nice suit. Something soft." He spoke to her loudly and slowly, the way one speaks to a child or someone they assume is mentally deficient, and Sophie's grip on the tray tightened because she saw something the others didn't. Something painfully clear. The woman wasn't confused. She wasn't senile. She was terrified, and she was trying to say something, but nobody was looking at her face. They were all looking at Lucas. The dinner rush began in earnest then, the kitchen rising into a chaotic symphony of shouting chefs, clattering pans, and the sizzling of foie gras, and Sophie found herself running on autopilot, weaving through the tables, refilling glasses, dodging Gavin's critical glare, yet her eyes kept drifting back to table 1, the VIP alcove, where the dynamic unfolding felt almost unbearable to witness. Lucas Harrington was on his phone, typing furiously, likely managing a crisis in Tokyo or London, and Sophie could see that he clearly cared for his mother. He had brought her here. After Albert he was distracted, a man bearing the weight of the world while missing the small, fragile world right in front of him. Meanwhile, Jessica and Thomas hovered with bright, brittle eagerness. "Mr. Harrington, would you like to see the wine list? We have a 1982 border. That is exquisite," Jessica purred, leaning in close to Lucas and effectively turning her back on the mother. And Lucas didn't even look up as he replied, "Water for me, sparkling, and tea for my mother, Earl Grey." "Excellent choice," Jessica beamed, pivoting at last toward the older woman, her smile faltering into a mask of polite condescension. "And for you, sweetie, do you want some bread to nibble on while you wait?" The woman, Evelyn Harrington, looked at Jessica, and her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and currently filled with frustration as she moved her hand slightly, tapping her index finger against her lips twice, a deliberate motion. Jessica blinked, misunderstanding entirely. "I'll take that as a yes to the bread." She turned away, rolling her eyes at Thomas as they walked back to the station, and Sophie, standing near the bread station, saw it all with a clarity that made her chest ache. She didn't ask for bread, Sophie whispered to herself, but Jessica brushed past her with a dismissive flick of irritation. "God, that old lady is creepy. She just stares, doesn't say a word. I think she's had a stroke or something. It's sad, really, but does she have to be so vacant?" "She's not vacant," Sophie said, her voice quiet but firm enough to carry meaning. "She's deaf." Jessica stopped and looked at Sophie with a snap. "Excuse me, since when are you a doctor?" Sophie. "Gavin said she's just old and out of it. Besides, Lucas is the one paying the bill. Focus on him." But she signaled, "Get back to work. Miller, table 6 needs clearing. Stop spying on the VIPs before Gavin fires you." Sophie bit her lip, swallowed the retort, burning in her throat, grabbed the water pitcher, and headed out. Yet the injustice of it gnawed at her relentlessly as she watched Thomas bring the tea and place the cup down, aggressively hard so that tea sloshed over the rim onto the saucer. Evelyn jumped at the impact, looking at the hot liquid, then at Thomas, and making a gesture, her hand flat, moving in a circular motion over her chest. Please. Then she pointed at the spilled tea and made a brushing motion. A simple request for dignity, for help. Thomas sighed audibly. It's just a little spill. Mum, it'll dry. He walked away without wiping it, and Evelyn looked down at her lap, her shoulders slumping in quiet resignation while Lucas was still typing, oblivious to the small indignities being piled upon his mother. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs as she remembered the rule: do not approach the VIP table unless assigned. Breaking this rule was grounds for immediate termination, and Gavin had fired a busboy last month just for making eye contact with a celebrity. But Sophie also remembered her own childhood, the silence of her home, not because it was empty but because sound wasn't the primary language. Her grandmother who had raised her while her parents worked and had lost her hearing in her 30s, and how Sophie had learned to speak with her hands before she could write her name. She saw the isolation in Evelyn's eyes, the same look her grandmother used to have when shopkeepers shouted at her or ignored her entirely. And in that moment Sophie made a decision, a stupid, reckless decision that would likely cost her the job she desperately needed to pay for her father's treatment. But she couldn't stand there and do nothing, so she placed her tray down on the service counter, smoothed her apron with trembling hands, took a deep breath inhaling the scent of truffle oil and indifference, and walked straight toward table 1 while Gavin was across the room, schmoozing with a table of bankers. He didn't see her at first. Sophie approached the table quietly, almost cautiously, while Lucas was still on his phone and Evelyn was staring at the puddle of tea on her saucer, looking defeated, and Sophie didn't speak. She didn't say, "Excuse me," and she didn't ask, "Can I help you?" Instead, she stepped into Evelyn's line of sight and waited until the older woman looked up, startled by the new presence, and then Sophie raised her hands. "Are you okay?" she signed, her movements fluid, precise, and gentle. And Evelyn's eyes went wide as the dull resignation vanished, replaced by a spark of pure shock. She sat up straighter. "You know, sign." Evelyn signed back, her hands trembling slightly but her movements clear. "Yes," Sophie signed, a small, genuine smile breaking through her nervous mask. "I saw you asked for a napkin and that the tea is too hot. Would you like me to fix it?" A gasp not from Evelyn, but from the room. Clear as throat, the silence around the table suddenly felt heavy, charged, and Lucas Harrington had stopped typing. He slowly lowered his phone to the table and looked at his mother, who was now leaning forward, her face alive with an emotion he hadn't seen in years. And then he looked at the waitress, and Sophie felt the weight of his gaze burning like a laser as panic flared in her chest, because she had overstepped. She was bothering the billionaire's mother. I'm sorry," Sophie stammered verbally, her voice cracking as she looked at Lucas. I noticed she was trying to communicate." Before Lucas could respond, a shadow fell over the table. "What is going on here?" It was Gavin, his face a mask of purple rage as he gripped Sophie's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep hard enough to bruise. "Mr. Harrington, I am so deeply sorry," Gavin sputtered, pulling Sophie back roughly. "This employee is new. She is incompetent. She knows she is not allowed in this section. I will have her removed immediately. Get out of here, Miller. You're done." "Wait," Evelyn signed frantically, slapping her hand on the table to make a sound. But Gavin wasn't looking at Evelyn. He was looking at Lucas, desperate to salvage the situation. "Security is on the way. She won't bother you again." Gavin let go of my arm. Sophie whispered, tears springing to her eyes from the pain and humiliation. "You're fired, Sophie. Get your things and let her go." The voice was low, baritone, and terrifyingly calm, and it didn't come from Gavin, it came from Lucas Harrington. Gavin froze, his hand dropping from Sophie's arm as if he had been burned. "Mr. Harrington." Lucas stood up, tall and imposing, and currently he looked furious, but his anger wasn't directed at the waitress. "Did you not see what just happened?" Lucas asked, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the restaurant. She was bothering your mother," Gavin stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "She was making gang signs or waving her hands around." Lucas looked at Gavin with a mixture of disbelief and disgust, then turned to his mother. Evelyn looked at Lucas and signed rapidly, her face fierce. "This girl is the only person in this entire building who has treated me like a human being. The others treat me like a piece of furniture." Lucas looked at Sophie, and the ice in his eyes melted, replaced by something intense and assessing. "My mother says," Lucas translated, his voice hard as stone as he addressed Gavin, "that this incompetent waitress is the only one who showed her any respect." Gavin's jaw dropped. She speaks. She is deaf, you idiot," Lucas snapped. "She isn't invisible." He turned to Sophie. "What is your name?" Sophie, she whispered, rubbing her arm where Gavin had grabbed her. Sophie Miller. Sophie, Lucas said. My mother has been refusing to come out to dinner for 5 years because she hates how people treat her. Tonight I finally convinced her, and for the last 20 minutes, I have watched your staff ignore her, talk over her, and treat her like a child. I was about to walk out. He paused, looking at his mother, who was smiling at Sophie, a real warm smile. Please, Lucas said to Sophie, pulling out the empty chair next to his mother. Sit down, clear's throat, sir. Sophie blinked. I can't. I'm working. Not anymore, Gavin interjected, trying to regain control. She's fired. She broke protocol. Lucas turned to Gavin. If she is fired, then I am buying this building, burning it to the ground, and ensuring you never work in the city again. Do I make myself clear? The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Even the chefs in the open kitchen had stopped moving. Lucas looked back at Sophie. Please sit. My mother would like to talk to you, and I would like to know why a waitress at Liesel speaks a dialect of sign language that hasn't been used in this region for 30 years. Sophie froze, her heart skipping a beat. Dialect. She had just signed the way her grandmother taught her. What do you mean? Sophie asked, her voice barely audible. Lucas narrowed his eyes, studying her face, really looking at her for the first time, taking in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw. Where did you learn to sign, Sophie? My grandmother, she said. She taught me. She passed away last year. What was her name? Evelyn signed, leaning forward, her intensity sudden and frightening. Sophie signed back, Alice Miller. Evelyn let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob, her hand flying clear's throat to her mouth as she looked at Lucas, her eyes filling with tears. It's her, Evelyn signed, her hand shaking so hard she could barely form the words. Lucas, look at her face. It's Alice's granddaughter. It's her. Lucas looked from his mother to Sophie, his face losing all its color. Sophie, Lucas said, his voice trembling. Your grandmother. Did she ever mention a sister? A sister she left behind when she ran away from home 40 years ago. Sophie shook her head, confused. No, she said she was an orphan. She said she had no family left. Lucas took a deep breath. She lied. The atmosphere at table 1 had shifted from public spectacle to an intimate, almost suffocating intensity, and though the other diners had eventually returned to their meals, eyes kept darting towards the alcove where the billionaire CEO was sitting with a waitress who should have been fired 10 minutes ago. Sophie sat on the edge of the velvet chair, her apron feeling like a lead weight against her chest, feeling like an imposter, a fraud, because she was Sophie Miller, the girl who watered down her dish soap to make it last longer, and she didn't belong at a table with crystal stemware and secrets that spanned decades. She lied, Sophie repeated, her voice barely a whisper. My grandmother, she was the most honest person I knew. She worked as a seamstress her whole life. She didn't have a sister. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand paper-thin and shaking, covering Sophie's rough work-worn hand. The contrast stark between the manicured hand of old money and the chapped hand of survival. Alice didn't have just a sister, Evelyn signed, her eyes locked on Sophie's face, searching for ghosts. She had a twin. Sophie's breath hitched. A twin, she signed back. Lucas watched the exchange, his mind racing, and poured a glass of sparkling water for Sophie, an act of service that would have made the gossip columns if a photographer had been present. My mother is telling the truth, Lucas said, his voice low. My Aunt Alice disappeared in 1984. I was only a toddler, so I don't remember her, but the story in the family was always complicated. Tell her the truth, Lucas, Evelyn signed sharply. Don't sugarcoat the poison. Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. The story I was told was that Alice stole the Harrington star, a diamond necklace worth a fortune, and ran away with a lover. She was disowned, erased from the family tree. My grandfather forbade anyone from speaking her name. Sophie pulled her hand back, offended on behalf of the woman who had raised her. That's impossible. My grandmother died with nothing. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. If she had a diamond necklace, she wouldn't have let my father work himself into an early grave at the docks. She wouldn't have let us go hungry. Lucas looked at Sophie, really seeing the fray on her collar and the exhaustion etched into her young face. I believe you, he said softly. Because of the signs. The signs? Sophie asked. The sign you used for grandmother, Lucas explained. You touched your chin and then twisted your pinky finger. In standard American Sign Language, that's not the sign. That was a home sign, a secret code Evelyn and Alice invented when they were children, locked away in the nursery because their parents were ashamed of having deaf daughters. Sophie stared at him, stunned. She had always thought that was just how you signed grandmother. We made our own world, Evelyn signed, tears streaming down her face. Because the real world didn't want us. Alice didn't steal that necklace, Sophie. She was framed, and I know who did it. The revelation hung in the air like something fragile and explosive. It was my husband, Evelyn signed. Lucas's father, Richard. Lucas stiffened. Mother, we've talked about this. Father was hard, but he wasn't a criminal. He was a monster. Evelyn signed with a ferocity that made her seem 10 years younger. He hated that I relied on Alice. He wanted me isolated so he could control the Harrington Trust. He planted the necklace in Alice's bag. He gave her an ultimatum. Leave and never return, or go to prison and leave me alone with him. She left to protect me. She sacrificed her life so I wouldn't lose mine. Sophie felt the room spinning as the pieces rearranged themselves into something unrecognizable. Her grandmother, the woman who clipped coupons and sewed patches onto Sophie's school uniforms, had been a Harrington, had been an heiress who gave up everything. Why didn't she tell me? Sophie whispered. Shame, Lucas said quietly. Or fear. If my father threatened her, she probably stayed away to keep you and your father safe. Lucas looked at Sophie with a sudden intensity. If you are Alice's granddaughter, that makes us cousins. Second cousins. It means you are blood. The word sounded heavy, dangerous. I don't want anything, Sophie said quickly, standing up as panic flared in her chest. Because rich people didn't just accept long-lost relatives, they sued them. They buried them. I saw a lady who needed help. That's all. I have to get back to work. Sophie, sit down, Lucas commanded, though his tone was gentle. I can't, she pleaded. Gavin is watching. I need this job. My dad, he's sick. If I get fired, I lose the health insurance, the dialysis. Lucas stood up, towering over her. Sophie, look at me. You do not have a job here anymore. Sophie felt the tears finally spill over. Please don't say that. You don't have a job, Lucas continued, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a sleek black business card, his voice steady and decisive. Because you are family and Harringtons do not wait tables at Luciel. And he turned to look toward the kitchen doors where Gavin was peeking through the porthole window, his face pale and sweaty, before announcing, we are leaving, and you are coming with us. We are going to see your father. I can't just leave, Sophie stammered, her mind spinning. Watch me, Lucas said, and instead of signaling for the check for the meal, he signaled for the entire restaurant, waving Thomas over. Tell the manager, Lucas said, his voice carrying across the silent room, that I am buying out the restaurant for the rest of the night. Everyone goes home, paid in full, except for Gavin. Tell him to wait in his office. Then he turned back to Sophie. Let's go get your coat. As they walked out of the dining room, Lucas, pushing the wheelchair, Sophie walking beside them in her stained apron, she felt the eyes of every Siorka boring into her back. Jessica looked like she had swallowed a lemon. But as they passed the kitchen, Sophie saw Gavin clear his throat, and he wasn't in his office. He was standing in the shadows of the waiter's station holding his phone up, not calling for help but recording, and on his face was a look of pure distilled malice. The ride to the hospital was surreal. Sophie had never been in a limousine before, and it smelled of leather and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the sterile antiseptic smell of the St. Jude's Medical Center where her father, Arthur, was currently hooked up to a machine that cleaned his blood because his kidneys had failed him. Clear his throat, Lucas sat across from her with his laptop open, already making calls, fully in CEO mode. I have my legal team looking into the 1984 police reports, Lucas said without looking up from the screen. And I have a private investigator heading to your grandmother's old apartment building. If there is proof of what my mother says, we will find it. Evelyn held Sophie's hand the entire ride, not signing much but tracing the lines on Sophie's palm as if trying to read the history written there. When they arrived at the hospital, the nurses at the front desk nearly dropped their clipboards. Lucas Harrington walking into a state-of-fumed public hospital was like a lion walking into a petting zoo. Arthur Miller, room 304, Sophie said, her voice shaking, and they took the elevator up under the loud hum of fluorescent lights as nausea rolled through her, and she wondered how her father would react, because he had never mentioned the Harringtons, not once. They entered the room, and Arthur Miller looked small in the hospital bed. Only 50 but looking 70, his skin grey, his eyes sunken, asleep. Dad, Sophie whispered, and Arthur stirred, his eyes fluttering open as he smiled weakly at her. Soph, you're early. Did you get off shift? Then he saw the man in the charcoal suit and the woman in the wheelchair, and the color drained from Arthur's face so fast. Sophie thought he was having a heart attack as the monitor beside his bed began to beat faster. You, Arthur rasped. pointing a shaking finger at Evelyn. Get out, Dad. Stop. Sophie rushed to the bed. Their family? This is Evelyn, Grandma Alice's sister. I know who she is, Arthur shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to sit up and began coughing violently. She's the reason we have nothing. She's the reason my mother died broken-hearted. Arthur, please, Evelyn signed, her face twisting in pain. Don't you wave your hands at me, Arthur yelled. I know the language my mother taught me. You let her take the fall. You let your husband destroy her. I didn't know, Arthur. Lucas stepped forward, his hands raised in a calming gesture. I didn't know the truth until tonight. You're a Harrington, Arthur spat. You're all the same vipers. You think you can just walk in here with your money and fix 30 years of poverty. My mother died scrubbing floors. Where were you then? We didn't know where she was, Evelyn wailed, a vocalization loud and guttural that shocked everyone as she slammed her fist on the armrest of her chair and signed rapidly, aggressively. I looked for her. For 10 years, I hired detectives. Richard hid the reports. He told me she was dead. He told me she died in a car accident in 1988. I mourned her for 20 years. Arthur froze, the room falling silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the dialysis machine. He told you she was dead, Arthur whispered. Yes, Evelyn signed, tears flowing freely now. I never stopped loving her. I never stopped missing my other half. Arthur slumped back against the pillows, the fight draining out of him as he looked at Sophie and then at Lucas. Is it true? Richard is dead. 5 years ago, Lucas confirmed. Heart attack. Arthur closed his eyes. Good. And while the family reconciliation was unfolding inside that cramped hospital room, a different kind of drama was taking shape back at Luciel, where Gavin was in the security room. Having sent the security guard on a coffee run that would take at least 20 minutes, he was hunched over the monitor in the security room, rewinding the footage from table 1 again and again, his shoulders tight, his eyes manic as he muttered, come on, give me something," watching the grainy black and white recording of Sophie approaching the table, watching the conversation unfold in silent, flickering frames. Then he saw it, and the angle was perfect. Lucas had handed Sophie the business card, but on the security footage the sleek black card looked like a credit card, and the way Sophie took it quickly, nervously shoving it into her apron pocket, looked suspicious. Still, that wasn't enough, not for Gavin, because he needed more. He needed to destroy her character completely. So he switched cameras to the locker room and fast-forwarded to earlier that evening when Sophie was putting her bag away. And Gavin smiled slowly as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch containing a diamond earring, a prop he had swiped from the lost and found box months ago and kept waiting for a rainy day. He stood up, walked to the staff lockers with the master key in hand, opened Sophie's locker, saw her old fraying canvas bag, unzipped it, and whispered, "Goodbye, Sophie," before dropping the diamond earring into the side pocket of her bag, zipping it back up carefully, and then taking out his phone to dial a number saved for emergencies. Police. Yes. I'd like to report a grand larceny at Leo restaurant. Yes, involving an employee. I have security footage, and I believe the stolen item is currently in her possession. He hung up with a cold smile playing on his lips, satisfied, certain that Sophie thought she had won the lottery when in reality she was about to find out that crossing Gavin Unell was a one-way ticket to a jail cell. Back at the hospital, the mood had settled into a fragile truce as Lucas arranged for a private doctor to assess Arthur. "We're moving him," Lucas said, "to the Harrington private wing at St. Luke's tonight." "I can't afford that," Arthur mumbled weakly. "You're not paying for it," Lucas said firmly. "The family trust is." Sophie felt a wave of relief so strong her knees nearly buckled, and she sat in the corner watching them, feeling safe for the first time in her life until her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Sophie, where are you? The police are here. They're tearing the locker room apart. They said something about a missing diamond earring from a guest last week. Gavin told them to check your locker." Sophie's blood turned to ice. "No," she whispered. Lucas looked over. "What is it?" "Gavin," she said, staring up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "He called the police. He says I stole something." Lucas's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10. He buttoned his suit jacket. "Sophie," Lucas said calmly, "did you steal anything?" "No, never." "Then we have nothing to worry about," Lucas said, though his eyes were dark. "Stay here with your father and my mother. Lock the door." "Where are you going?" Evelyn signed sharply. Lucas checked his watch. "I'm going back to the restaurant. It seems Gavin didn't understand my earlier warning. I'm going to have to explain it to him again in a language he understands." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Sophie, don't answer your phone." Clears throat, don't talk to the police until I get there. This isn't about theft. This is war. He walked out, and Sophie watched him go, dread rising thick in her throat. She knew men like Gavin cockroaches, hard to kill and filthy, but she didn't know men like Lucas Harrington yet. And she prayed he was as dangerous as he looked. Because if the police found whatever Gavin had planted, her new life as a Harrington eyes would end before it even began. And she would be just another poor girl who tried to steal from the rich, and nobody believes the poor girl. Outside, Lucille, flashing blue and red lights from the police cruisers reflected off the pristine glass windows, creating a chaotic strobe effect that clashed violently with the restaurant's golden elegance. And inside the scene was a tableau of accusation. Two unformed officers stood by the employee lockers, one holding a clear evidence bag containing a shimmering diamond earring, the other taking a statement from Gavin, who was giving the performance of his life, dabbing at his forehead with a silk handkerchief, his voice trembling with feigned disappointment. It breaks my heart, Officer Gavin sighed, shaking his head. Sophie, she always seems so sweet, quiet, but I suppose that's how they get you, the quiet ones. We've had guests complaining about missing items for weeks. I didn't want to believe it was her, but when I saw her rummaging through her bag suspiciously earlier, you did the right thing. Mr. Clears Throat O'Connell, the officer said, scribbling in his notebook. We'll need to bring her in for questioning. Since the value of this jewelry exceeds $5,000, it's a felony charge. A tragedy, Gavin murmured, hiding a smirk behind his handkerchief. She has a sick father, you know. Desperation makes people do terrible things. Just then, the front doors blew open. They didn't simply open. They slammed against the stops with a violent crack that made everyone jump, and Lucas Harrington strode in without an overcoat despite the chill outside, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his tie slightly loosened, and fury walking in with him. He looked like a man who had walked through a hurricane to get there, clothes slightly disheveled, jaw tight with controlled fury. Mr. Harrington, Gavin exclaimed, rushing forward and instantly switching his mask to one of polished professional concern. I am so sorry you have to see this. It's a police matter. That girl, the one who bothered your mother, she's a thief. We found the evidence. Lucas didn't break his stride. He kept walking until he was inches from Gavin's face, towering over the manager, the air around him seeming to crackle with static electricity. Officer Lucas said, his voice terrifyingly level, do not touch that locker. The police officer looked up, irritated. Sir, this is an active crime scene. Who are you? I am Lucas Harrington, he replied evenly. I own the holding company that owns the real estate group that owns this building, and I am telling you that you are being played. Gavin let out a brittle laugh. Mr. Harrington, please. The evidence is right there. It was in her bag. I saw it myself. Did you? Lucas turned his cold gaze on him. You saw it yourself? Well, I mean, I saw her acting suspicious, so I directed the officers. Gavin stammered, sweat breaking through his foundation. Lucas calmly pulled his smartphone from his pocket, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up for the officers. Officer, are you aware that Lyall installed a new security system last week? Lucas asked. Gavin blinked rapidly. No, we didn't. The cameras in the locker room have been broken for months. I put in the work order myself. You put in a work order to my maintenance team, Lucas corrected coolly. And because I had suspected for a long time that this restaurant was bleeding money due to mismanagement, I had them install high-definition, cloud-based pinhole cameras in the locker room vents. They record audio and video and they are active 24/7. Gavin's face went the color of old milk. Play the video, Lucas commanded the officer. The officer took the phone, and on the screen crystal clear footage rolled. The locker room empty except for one person. Gavin. It showed him glancing over his shoulder, checking the door, pulling a velvet pouch from his pocket, using a master key to open Sophie's locker, dropping the earring into the canvas bag, and, most damning of all, whispering, goodbye. Sophie. The silence in the restaurant was absolute, broken only by the low hum of refrigerator units. The officer looked up from the phone, his expression hardening as his gaze settled on Gavin. Mr. O'Connell, the officer said, his hand moving to his belt, turn around and place your hands behind your back. No, that's that stuff. It's a deep fake, Gavin shrieked, stumbling backward and knocking over a stack of menus. He's trying to frame me because I fired that deaf girl. He's sleeping with her. You are under arrest for filing a false police report, tampering with evidence and attempted grand larceny, the officer recited, spinning Gavin around and slamming him against the locker as the handcuffs clicked shut with a sharp metallic sound of justice. Lucas watched without a flicker of emotion, then stepped closer to the weeping, thrashing man. You tried to destroy a girl who has nothing, Lucas whispered low enough that only Gavin could hear. You tried to take the only thing she has left, her freedom, just because she embarrassed you. You are a small, pathetic man, Gavin. And I will make sure you spend the next 10 years in a cell where nobody cares if you speak or not. As the police dragged Gavin out, kicking and screaming, the kitchen staff peeked from the back. Jessica stood frozen by the wine rack, her mouth agape. Lucas turned to the staff. Listen to me, he announced, his voice filling every corner of the room. Sophie Miller is not a thief. She is a Harrington. She is my cousin, and as of this moment, she is the majority shareholder of this establishment. Jessica dropped a wine glass. It shattered against the floor. If any of you, Lucas continued, staring directly at Jessica, have ever mistreated her, mocked her, or made her feel small, I suggest you have your resignation letters on my desk by tomorrow morning, because she will be reviewing every single employee file, and she has a very long memory. Lucas buttoned his jacket and turned to the lead officer. I will send the raw footage to the district attorney within the hour. Then he walked out, leaving behind a shattered hierarchy and a staff suddenly terrified of the shy girl they had ignored for years. 3 days later, Arthur Miller was transferred to the Harrington estate. It wasn't a house, but a fortress of stone and ivy perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, and the doctors said Arthur needed rest, clean air, and stress-free living. He was getting all three. Sophie sat in the grand library, beneath ceilings so high they seemed to have their own weather patterns, holding a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. Staring up at the portrait above the fireplace, a painting of 2 young girls holding hands in a garden. One was Evelyn, her eyes bright and mischievous. The other was Alice, Sophie's grandmother, and she looked exactly like Sophie. I never knew this painting existed, Sophie said softly, and Evelyn rolled her wheelchair over, looking better, healthier, the shadows under her eyes fading as she signed. Your grandfather, my father, tried to burn it, and I hid it in the attic. I dragged it up the stairs myself when I was 12. And just then Lucas walked in carrying a dusty leather-bound box, placing it carefully on the coffee table as he said, the private investigator found this. It was in a storage unit in Queens, registered under the name Alice Stone, the alias your grandmother used when she first ran away, and Sophie's heart hammered as she asked what's in it. Lucas answering that they haven't opened it, they waited for you, and Arthur was wheeled into the room by a private nurse, looking frail but with eyes still sharp as he said, open it, Sophie. So Sophie reached out. The leather cracked with age, the latch rusted, and she pried it open to the smell of lavender and old paper. On top a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon. Beneath them, a heavy object wrapped in a stained mechanic's rag. Sophie picking up the letters first and unfolding the top one. The handwriting jagged and frantic. My dearest Evelyn, I clears throat, am safe, I am in the city. I cannot tell you where or Richard will find me. I miss you every hour. Please know I did not take the star. I would never steal from our family. Richard put it in my coat pocket before the gala. He smiled when he did it. He said if I didn't leave, he would have you committed to an asylum. He said a deaf woman couldn't run the estate. I left to save you, and Sophie read the letter aloud, her voice breaking, Aileen letting out a low wail and burying her face in her hands while Lucas went to her, kneeling beside the chair and holding her as he said he'd threatened to institutionalize her, his voice thick with disgust. My father was a monster. And Arthur said harassingly, keep reading, what's in the rag? So Sophie reached for the heavy object and unwrapped the greasy cloth to find not a necklace but a cassette tape, an old TDK audio cassette, a tape. Sophie frowned, and Lucas said there's an old player in the study and ran to get it. And moments later they sat in silence as the magnetic tape hissed before a man's voice, arrogant and slurring slightly, cut through the static. Look, Alice, it's simple math, you're the defective one. Clears throat, I'm the heir. Evelyn is useless. She can't hear. She can't speak properly. She's an embarrassment. I need the trust fund to cover my debts in Macau. You're going to be the scapegoat. You take the necklace or well, the police will find it on you and you disappear. You give up your claim to the Harrington fortune. If you do, Evelyn stays safe at home. If you fight me, I'll have the doctors declare her mentally incompetent. I'll lock her away in the darkest hole I can find. Choose. And then a younger, softer voice. Alice's voice, you are evil, Richard. God will punish you. And the man replying, God isn't here, Alice, I am, and the tape clicked off, leaving a silence in the library that was heavy but not empty, filled instead with vindication as Sophie whispered she recorded him. She didn't just run. She got proof. And Lucas asked why didn't she use it, Arthur speaking up from his wheelchair because she was afraid. She knew Richard had judges and police in his pocket back then. If she tried to release this, he might have killed her, so she hid it. She kept it as insurance in case he ever came after me or Sophie. And Lucas stood up and walked to the window to look out at the ocean, saying, "This changes everything. The board of directors, half of them appointed by my father, they still worship his legacy. This tape proves that the foundation of his power was blackmail and fraud." And he turned back to Sophie and said, "The Harrington Trust. The bylaws state that if her heir is coerced into disinheritance, the claim is void. Alice never lost her share, which means, Sophie, half of everything is yours." And Sophie looked around at the velvet drapes, the marble statues, the sheer scale of the wealth, and said, I don't want to be a billionaire if it means becoming like Richard." And Evelyn signed, wiping her eyes, "You won't be. You have Alice's heart, and you have my gratitude. You brought my sister back to me in spirit." And Sophie looked at the tape and said, "We release it, we clear her name. We tell the world who Alice Harrington really was, not a thief, a hero." And 6 months later, the flashing lights outside the building weren't police sirens, but paparazzi cameras. The banner above the entrance reading the Alice and Evelyn Harrington Center for Communication, a state-of-the-art facility in the heart of the city dedicated to the deaf community, providing education, job placement, and legal aid. And on the ground floor, a restaurant, the Silent Spoon, bustling inside yet different from Lyall with no hushed pretension. The staff mixed hearing and deaf working together seamlessly. Every table fitted with tablets for easy ordering, and the walls adorned with beautiful art celebrating sign language. And Sophie moved through the crowd, no longer wearing a waitress apron. She was wearing a tailored cream suit, and she looked confident, radiant. As she walked over to the VIP table where Arthur was sitting, looking 20 pounds heavier and full of life, laughing as he tried to sign a joke to Evelyn, and Evelyn was laughing silently too, her eyes crinkling with joy, while Lucas stood by the bar watching the room. And when he caught Sophie's eye, he raised a glass of champagne. He had dismantled his father's old board of directors. He had released the tape to the press. The scandal had been massive, but it had cleansed the company. And the Harrington name meant something different now. It meant truth. And when Sophie walked up to Lucas, he asked, nervous, and she admitted, smiling, terrified, but good terrified. And Lucas said, "You're a natural cousin. By the way, I got a letter from the prison today." And Sophie's smile faltered at the name Gavin. And Lucas said dryly, "He's enjoying his stay. Apparently he's working in the laundry. He says the starch makes his hands itch. I told his lawyer that was a shame." And Sophie laughed, a free light sound, saying, "I almost feel sorry for him. Almost." And Lucas said, "Don't. He taught us a valuable lesson. He taught us that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers." And Sophie looked back at her father and her great-aunt where Evelyn was teaching Arthur the sign for dessert. And Sophie raised her hands, catching Evelyn's attention from across the room, and signed, "Thank you." And Evelyn signed back, "Welcome home." And Sophie took a deep breath and looked at the restaurant, her restaurant, at the people, her family. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just a pair of hands serving food. She was Sophie Harrington Miller. She was the granddaughter of the woman who saved the family, and she had a lot to say. And that is how a simple act of kindness from a shy waitress to a woman in a wheelchair brought down a corrupt manager and rewrote history. Sophie didn't just find a fortune that day. She found her family, her voice, and the justice her grandmother had been denied for 30 years. And it's a powerful reminder that we should never judge someone by their silence or their station in life, because you never know who you are really talking to or who is listening. And if this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want more incredible stories about justice, secrets, and karma, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. What would you have done if you were in Sophie's shoes? Would you have risked your job to help Evelyn? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next.